Shabbat Shalom. Maybe if I was in a different kind of graduate school, during orientation when as students we were hoping to get to know each other and kind of gathering in people's homes for meals, we would have done icebreakers like, what is your favorite sports team? But I went to rabbinical school. So as I was sitting in someone's living room, someone asked the question, hey, what's your favorite verse of Torah? I actually surprised myself with my answer because I had never considered what that answer might be. And immediately it came to me from Leviticus, you shall not defraud your fellow, you shall not commit robbery, the wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. It's a little bit out there, right? I mean, you might pick the one about when, Rebecca sees Isaac for the first time and falls off her camel, or when God created the world, or the rainbow. This is the one that stood out to me. And it caused me to think about why. I have a sheet of texts, and it's the first one if you want to refer to it. And if you're joining us virtually, you can click on a link and see the texts that I have provided for you. I think part of what I love about this verse is that it's something that should be common sense, but it isn't always. And it's something we might sometimes just neglect to do. You're paying the babysitter, you realize you don't have enough cash, you say, I'll give it to you next week. And it's really a reminder that that is completely unacceptable. And there's something I really appreciate about that directness. And in fact, it's such an important value that it's repeated again in Deuteronomy. I also have that reference listed below. You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of the communities of your land. You must pay out the wages due on the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it. Else a cry to Adonai will be issued against you, and you will incur guilt. All right, so this one goes deeper, it's more emphatic, and it expands the details of to whom you are talking about, whereas in the previous verse it was specific that it was about a fellow laborer, meaning another Israelite. Here it adds whether it's Israelite or stranger. Again, I appreciate that. The idea that an employer should never take advantage of a relationship that you have with someone who has things in common with you, and you should never exploit a relationship with someone who has differences from you. Every person and every person's work needs to be treated with equality and with respect. On reflection, I was preparing this week for this Torah study through the lens of Labor Day, and I was thinking about why I was so drawn to this verse. It occurred to me that as a religious school student here at Temple Emanu-El, some of the teachings that I actually remember most and left the greatest impression upon me were the significant role that Jews, and in particular Jewish women, played in America's labor movement, which we honor and celebrate this weekend. Jewish immigrants became critical forces behind the founding and growth of unions and the demand for safety in the workplace and appropriate rights for laborers. And in fact, the march that was the foundation for Labor Day, which happened on September 5th in 1882, when more than 10,000 workers, instead of going to work, marched from City Hall to Union Square right here in New York City. Jews were heavily represented. There are so many other moments in the labor movement. The famous uprising when 20,000 people on November 23rd, 1909, mostly Jewish immigrants, mostly young women in their teens and early 20s, launched an 11-week general strike in the shirtwaist industry again here in New York, demanding better pay and better working conditions. And then that sparked a revolt that transformed the garment industry into one of the best organized trades in the US. There is the tragic story we know about the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, which refused to negotiate with unions. And a year later, there was a terrible, tragic fire where more than 146 workers perished, many of them Jews. So there are so many examples throughout history, so many names of people who were Jewish, that this felt to me like an appropriate conversation for us to have, digging into not just our history, but the texts that really provided the foundation for this Jewish principle of how we regard people who are laborers and their work. So let's return to the sheet that you have of texts. So we learn in rabbinic law, in the oral law, that not only is work something that is essential, but it is actually something to be celebrated, even if you don't need to work to support yourself. And by the way, this is in sharp contrast to the cultures, the surrounding cultures of that time. In the ancient Greek and Roman cultures, actually, if you could manage not to work and to live, that was a sign of esteem. I mean, that was something that meant you had high position and high power. That was something you aspired to. Not true for Jewish tradition. So if you look at the third text from Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah, it tells us, Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Judah Hanasi, said, "Excellent is the study of Torah when combined with a worldly occupation, for toil in them both keeps sin out of one's mind. But the study of Torah which is not combined with a worldly occupation, in the end comes to be neglected and becomes the source of sin." It's interesting because I think we can, there are certain communities where it is believed among Jews that studying Torah, if you could do it 24 hours a day, you should do it 24 hours a day. And here's this ancient text, one of our earliest rabbinic texts, which says no. That actually, if you only study Torah, that can lead to sin, that you need to ground yourself in the experience of working. And really, it's actually no surprise, because if you read the Talmud or Midrash, you might recall that many of our greatest sages and scholars are actually physical laborers. They are blacksmiths and woodcutters, they are builders and farmers and tanners and bakers and tailors. And they are the scholars that provide us with the foundation of halakha, of Jewish law. They do both. And just to make sure that we get this message, we read here in the Talmud, Rabbi Yehuda used to go to the Beit Midrash, to the house of study where everyone is immersed, poring over their texts. He would go carrying a pitcher on his shoulder. He would say, "Great is work as it gives honor to the one who does it." Rabbi Shimon would carry a basket on his shoulders and would say, "Great is work as it gives honor to the one who does it." Never, ever, ever should we look down on somebody who does work that we consider menial, who does work that we consider uneducated. And I think it's important that we consider, how often do we thank people and regard them who clean our buildings, who drive our buses? It's something that sometimes we forget to think about. And here are these rabbis who literally carry their work into the Beit Midrash to emphasize that that is also sacred work and that one is not greater than the other. We have, I threw in a more modern text from Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, who says, in the Jewish worldview, work is sacred. It is building and creating and is a partnership with God in the work of creation. if we only study texts, where does that get us? When we actually do work, when we engage in the world that God gave us, when we work at the soil, when we build the buildings, we are actually functioning in the way that God functions. We are creating. Now we have an interesting text. He who enjoys the fruits of his own labor is greater than the man who fears God. This is part of a larger text that I didn't include. I could have included so much more. But basically, the idea is that someone who is pious and who has fear of God may get into heaven. But one who loves their work, they are certain to get into heaven. It's interesting here that it's not just about doing the work. It is about enjoying the work, finding fulfillment in the work, loving the work. And there is actually halacha that comes from this. So for example, someone who is a laborer, an agricultural laborer, not only are they allowed to eat from the harvest, they must, because they must taste of the work that they have done. And that can be true in so many ways. So where in many industries, there is the idea that if in some way you can benefit from the work that you're doing, that's a perk, Judaism would say, no, it's not a perk at all. It's do you. You may not own the company, you may not own whatever the business is, but you must benefit from it directly so that you can take pride and joy and you can savor the work that you have put into making it happen. We have a commentary, a later commentary on this verse, which questions, love work? How? This teaches that a person should love work and not hate work. Just as the Torah was given through the covenant, so too was work given through the covenant. As it says, for 6 days you shall labor to do all of your work, and the seventh day is a Sabbath to your God. It would be misguided of us if we considered Shabbat to be a relief. It is its own delight and its own joy. But that doesn't mean that we aren't supposed to derive fulfillment and take joy in the work days. In fact, those are supposed to be sources of joy for us as well. And I think anyone here who has ever had any kind of job knows that in order to love your work, in order to enjoy your work, in order to feel fulfilled by your work, it's important that the job itself provides you with a safe environment, provides you with an environment that protects your rights. Because you might love the work, but if the job isn't giving you what you need, you can't enjoy it. So, from that derive so many halachic laws that cover issues that unions were fighting for in the couple of centuries ago here in the States and that people are still fighting for. It would be, it's another drash or another class to look through some of them, but you have to believe me, I didn't provide the texts, but there are halachic texts that cover not only prompt payment, but work hours should be limited, that there is the right, as I said, to benefit from your labor, that you deserve sick and disability pay, that you have the right for collective bargaining and the rights to strike. There are so many labor laws grounded in verses of the Torah and developed through the rabbinic period and enacted throughout our Jewish, our American history. If you flip the page, this is kind of a favorite text of mine. It tells a bit of a story, and I think it really helps to illustrate just how far an employer is supposed to go. Porters working for Rabbi Bar Hanan broke a jug of wine. He seized their cloaks. They told Rav, who said to Rabbi Bar Hanan, "Give them their clothing." Rabbi Bar Hanan asked, "Is this the law?" Rav replied, "Yes, because of the principle, you should walk in the ways of the good." Rabbi Bar Hanan gave them their cloaks. The porters said to him, "We are poor people who worked all day and are hungry and have nothing." Rav said to Rabbi Bar Hanan, "Give them their wages." Rabbi Bar Hanan again asked, "Is this the law?" Rav replied, "Yes, as it is written, and you shall keep the ways of the righteous." So what's happening here? Laborers have a mistake. It doesn't tell us if they were negligent, if there was something on the floor that caused them to slip. We don't know the circumstances, but they damaged the product that they were working with, and their employer, Rabbi Bar Hanan, wanted to be made whole for that. They didn't have money, so he took their cloaks. And then Rabbi, who actually was known in the Talmud for being very, very engaged in intricate details of halacha, of Jewish law, and would get very tied up and immersed in legal discourse, he said, "Give them their clothing back." So he did. And then when the workers said to their employer, who is now out whatever the cost of those barrels of wine would be, we still need to get paid for today. And he thought to himself, wait a minute, why? And Rabbi once again says, yes, you must. And what's most interesting about this text is that this rabbinic sage, who almost always swims in intricacies of legal discourse, actually bases this behavior, this it's not even just a behavior, this demand on a principle that that's what you do because it's good, and that's what you do because it's the way of being righteous. So he sort of weaves together this idea that being a mensch demands that we have the responsibility to look out for people who labor. It is a demand, it is a law, but he, instead of rooting it in discourse, roots it in principle. And that really is why this text stands out from so many others. And it's really a reminder to us that the way we engage with people and their labor, no matter who they are, no matter what they do, that is defining of how and who we are. And if we are supposed to model godlike behavior, then we need to think of that when we walk through our days and engage with workers and work of all kinds. I want to close with this poem by a Jewish feminist, Marge Piercy, who has this poem which I think encapsulates so beautifully these ancient teachings and, of course, this very contemporary history. Her poem is called "To Be of Use." The people I love best jump into work head first without dallying in the shallows and swim off with shore strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves an axe to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amorphas for wine or Isle Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. When we can learn to value our own labor and others' labor, when we understand the need and the import and the demand to create an environment where people can not only work safely and fairly, but enjoy their work, then we will be closer to that day that we aspire to, when we embody God's model and when the whole world will truly be at one.